Nathaniel Whitmore's eye-opening arrival at his own hotel. Nathaniel Whitmore, a black CEO whose success in the hospitality industry stemmed from hands-on leadership and an unwavering belief in fairness, was never one to sit in a distant office and read reports from afar. Whenever he acquired a new property, Nathaniel made it a personal priority to see the operation with his own eyes, not as the CEO, but as an ordinary guest or employee. His latest acquisition, a mid-sized hotel recently added to his growing portfolio, had already raised concerns. Guest reviews were inconsistent, staff turnover was unusually high, and whispers of a problematic culture had made their way to his office. Instead of calling a formal inspection, Nathaniel decided to visit the hotel undercover, giving himself the same experience any walk-in guest might have. Dressed down in a simple hoodie, jeans and sneakers, Nathaniel walked into the lobby late in the afternoon, blending into the background like any other traveler. At first glance, the hotel appeared ordinary enough: clean floors, tidy seating, and the faint sound of quiet conversations from the nearby lounge. But it took only moments for Nathaniel to notice the underlying cracks beneath the surface. Behind the front desk sat Kenneth, a disinterested young man whose eyes barely flicked up from his phone as Nathaniel approached. The indifference in Kenneth's posture set the tone even before a single word was exchanged. "Welcome. Do you have a reservation?" Kenneth asked, without a smile or any sense of hospitality. "No reservation," Nathaniel replied, keeping his tone polite. "Just passing through and hoping to get a room for the night." Kenneth's expression shifted slightly as he scanned Nathaniel's ID. His brows raised when he saw the local address printed on it. Without hesitation, Kenneth slid the ID back across the desk. "Sorry, we don't rent rooms to locals." Nathaniel paused, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Excuse me, it's hotel policy," Kenneth added, his voice flat. "Locals bring too much trouble: parties, noise, complaints, and damage. Management decided it's just easier to refuse all local guests." There was no apology in Kenneth's voice, no hesitation in his delivery. To him, profiling local guests, especially black ones, was just another part of his daily routine. Nathaniel, accustomed to subtle biases in his line of work, was still stunned at the blatant, unapologetic enforcement of such a discriminatory policy. He asked to speak with the manager, hoping perhaps there was a misunderstanding or a rogue employee enforcing outdated rules. Moments later, Jameson, the hotel's general manager, appeared from the back office. Far from correcting Kenneth, Jameson backed him up completely. "We've had too many problems with locals," Jameson explained with a shrug. "Parties, drugs, all sorts of nonsense. It's easier to ban them altogether." The ease with which Jameson justified discrimination left Nathaniel momentarily speechless. It was one thing for an individual employee to act on personal bias. It was another for a hotel to institutionalize it as official policy. As Nathaniel processed this, his attention was drawn to Nicolette, a young front desk employee working beside Kenneth. Unlike her colleague, Nicolette's discomfort was clear. She shifted uneasily, her hands fidgeting as her eyes flicked between Kenneth, Jameson, and Nathaniel. Though she said nothing, her expression conveyed uncertainty and quiet disapproval, as though she knew the policy was wrong but feared speaking out. Nathaniel chose not to reveal his identity. Instead, he quietly thanked them and left the hotel, knowing this wasn't just an isolated incident. What he had seen was a symptom of deeper cultural rot, a management team that cared more about convenience than fairness, a staff trained to follow orders without question, and policies that encouraged bias rather than hospitality. The next morning, Nathaniel returned not as a guest, but as a job applicant. Disguised once again in casual clothes, he approached the front desk and asked if they were hiring. Without so much as a formal interview or background check, Jameson offered him a position on the spot, citing high turnover and desperate staffing needs. It was clear to Nathaniel that what he had seen the night before was only the tip of the iceberg. To fix this hotel and to create real change, he would need to see the full picture from within. And so, Nathaniel Whitmore, the Black CEO, would step into the role of an entry-level employee at his own hotel, ready to uncover the truth, expose the cracks, and ultimately rebuild not just operations, but the culture itself. Nathaniel Whitmore goes undercover, a CEO behind the front desk. The morning after Nathaniel Whitmore, the Black CEO, was turned away from his own hotel for no reason other than being a local man in casual clothes, he returned not as a guest, but as a job applicant. Dressed in the same simple hoodie, jeans, and worn sneakers, Nathaniel walked through the hotel's sliding doors once again. This time, there was no pretense of booking a room. Instead, he approached the front desk and casually asked if the hotel was hiring. To Nathaniel's surprise, but not his shock, Jameson, the hotel's general manager, didn't bother with a formal interview. There were no questions about experience, background, or even availability. In a matter of minutes, Nathaniel was offered a job on the spot. The hiring process, or lack thereof, immediately confirmed Nathaniel's growing suspicions: high turnover, desperate staffing, and a management team far more concerned with filling shifts than hiring quality employees. Nathaniel was now on the inside, not as the CEO, but as a frontline employee, and it didn't take long before the dysfunction he had suspected began to reveal itself. A disengaged team and a culture of fear. Nathaniel's first day began with a rushed, half-hearted training session led by Nicolette, the same front desk employee who had seemed uncomfortable with the no locals policy the night before. As Nicolette walked him through the basics: how to check in guests, handle reservation software, and deal with customer complaints, Nathaniel noticed her hesitations. She had the competence of someone who knew her job well, but there was an underlying tension in her voice, the careful choice of words that only comes from employees afraid of saying the wrong thing. Over the course of the day, Nathaniel learned why. The staff at the hotel operated under constant fear of being blamed for any issue that arose. Whether it was a guest complaint, a missed cleaning, or a malfunctioning air conditioner, the fault always rolled downhill onto the lowest-ranking employee in sight. Disconnected management Jameson, who had confidently defended the discriminatory no locals policy, spent most of the day holed up in his office, avoiding the lobby entirely. The rare times he emerged were to criticize or micromanage, never to offer support or praise. Staff were expected to handle problems on their own, even when those problems required managerial approval or resources they didn't have access to. The disconnect between management and staff was absolute, and it was painfully clear that employees like Nicolette were left to fend for themselves. Poor service, not from laziness, but exhaustion throughout the day. Nathaniel saw firsthand how understaffed and overworked the employees were. Lucinda, the other front desk employee on shift, shuffled through her tasks with the exhaustion of someone carrying twice the workload she should have. There were no breaks, no backup staff. When a line formed at the desk, Lucinda and Nicolette were left to handle impatient guests alone, with no support from Jameson or anyone else in management. The poor service guests complained about wasn't due to laziness, it was due to employees being stretched to the breaking point. A maintenance department left to rot later in the shift. Nathaniel had a conversation with Theodore, the hotel's sole maintenance worker that day. Theodore was a veteran employee, someone who knew the building inside and out, but his requests for repairs, supplies, and help had been ignored for months. Broken air conditioning units sat untouched because there were no replacement parts ordered. Leaking pipes in guest bathrooms were temporarily patched instead of properly repaired. And Theodore, like the front desk staff, was blamed for every issue he had no power to fix. It was a culture of blame and neglect, and Nathaniel could see exactly why turnover was so high. An unfolding picture. By the end of his first day, Nathaniel had gathered far more insight than any corporate report could have provided. This hotel wasn't broken because of a bad location or unlucky circumstances. It was broken because management had failed its people at every level. Employees were treated as expendable. Problems were ignored until they became crises. Policies were enforced based on assumptions, not logic or fairness. Nathaniel had come in hoping to spot a few operational inefficiencies, but he had uncovered a complete collapse in leadership and culture. The question was no longer how to tweak processes, but how to rebuild the foundation from the ground up. And Nathaniel was ready to do exactly that. Nathaniel Whitmore witnesses the cracks in his own foundation. After stepping into the role of a low-level employee at his own hotel, Nathaniel Whitmore, the Black CEO, didn't have to wait long to see why the property was struggling. In just one day, he saw more dysfunction than any corporate report could have captured. It started from the moment he arrived for his first shift. Nicolette, the same front desk worker who had shown quiet discomfort with the discriminatory no locals policy, was assigned to train him. Despite her professional demeanor, there was a cautiousness in her every word, as if she'd learned that saying too much could put her job at risk. She walked him through the basics of the front desk system, but her explanations were frequently interrupted by guest complaints that were clearly the result of chronic neglect and mismanagement, not simple human error. The Wi-Fi wasn't working on the third floor. Several guests had check-in issues due to reservations being deleted from the system. One couple complained about a leaky faucet that hadn't been fixed, despite multiple requests. Every problem had a history, and none of those histories ended with proper resolution. A culture of blame and avoidance. As Nathaniel followed Nicolette through the day, he noticed a disturbing trend. Every complaint, every issue, every mistake landed squarely on the frontline employees. When Kenneth, the other front desk clerk, snapped at a guest for complaining about room cleanliness, it wasn't because Kenneth was lazy or rude. It was because Kenneth had been yelled at by Jameson just an hour earlier for not handling things himself. There was no support structure, no escalation process that worked the way it should. Problems rolled downhill, and the employees at the bottom were left to absorb the frustration of guests, managers, and each other. Absent leadership and closed doors throughout the day, Nathaniel noticed that Jameson, the general manager, spent almost the entire shift in his office. The only time Jameson emerged was to criticize someone, whether it was Lucinda at the desk for being too slow, or Theodore from maintenance for not fixing an issue quickly enough. There were no words of encouragement, no effort to understand why things were breaking down. Just a constant search for someone to blame, followed by disappearing back into his office to avoid the fallout. The message was clear: the employees were on their own. Overworked and undervalued staff. Nathaniel had expected to find some staffing shortages, but the reality was far worse. Lucinda, an older front desk clerk who had been with the hotel for years, looked exhausted from the moment she clocked in. She handled check-ins, guest complaints, reservation issues, and even tried to help housekeeping find missing supplies, all without any assistance from management. Nathaniel could see in her eyes the familiar exhaustion of someone who had been left to carry too much for too long. It was no surprise that turnover was so high the hotel wasn't just understaffed, it was burning through employees at a pace no business could sustain. Maintenance on the brink of collapse. Later in the day, Nathaniel had a chance to speak with Theodore, the lone maintenance worker on shift. Theodore, a man with decades of experience, had seen it all, but even he was reaching his breaking point. Work orders sat unfinished because parts were never ordered. Guest requests were ignored because there weren't enough staff to respond. Temporary fixes had become permanent solutions, with broken AC units and leaking pipes left to fester for weeks at a time. "Management doesn't care until a guest explodes," Theodore said with a tired shrug. "And when that happens, they just blame us." A culture in collapse. By the time Nathaniel ended his shift, he had seen the full picture. This hotel wasn't failing because of bad luck or even a bad location. It was failing because the people responsible for leading it had abandoned their roles. The frontline employees were expected to fix problems they had no power to solve, absorb the blame for every failure, and keep the hotel afloat without resources, respect, or support. Nathaniel had come to observe, but what he found was a culture of fear, neglect, and burnout. It wasn't a hospitality problem, it was a leadership problem. And now that Nathaniel had seen it for himself, he knew exactly where the changes had to begin. Nathaniel Whitmore unmasks the truth and holds leadership accountable after spending the day working undercover at his own hotel. Nathaniel Whitmore, the Black CEO, had seen enough. The patterns were undeniable. A culture of blame, neglect, and apathy had taken hold, stretching from the front desk to the maintenance room. It wasn't just a matter of incompetence. It was a complete failure of leadership. The next morning, Nathaniel walked into the hotel this time, not as a new employee, but as himself. The casual clothes were gone. In their place was a tailored suit, a presence that commanded attention, and the quiet but unmistakable authority of someone who owned not just the building, but the future of everyone inside it. Employees who had seen him the day before in jeans and sneakers stared in shock, their minds struggling to reconcile the humble trainee with the CEO now standing in front of them. But the most stunned face belonged to Jameson, the general manager. Nathaniel stood in the middle of the lobby, calling for a staff meeting on the spot. When the employees gathered, some curious, some nervous, all sensing that something major was about to happen, Nathaniel began to speak. "Some of you met me yesterday," he said calmly, "but not as myself. I came here to see this hotel as it truly operates, not through reports, but through your eyes." A ripple of whispers passed through the room. "I saw good people trying their best under impossible conditions," he continued. "I saw guests being ignored, maintenance requests going unanswered, and hard-working employees being blamed for problems they couldn't possibly fix." His gaze settled on Jameson, whose confidence had evaporated the moment Nathaniel revealed himself. "But the biggest problem I saw wasn't with the staff," Nathaniel said. "It was with leadership or the lack of it." The silence was deafening. Nathaniel didn't need to raise his voice. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. "This hotel doesn't have a staffing problem," Nathaniel said. "It has a leadership problem. And that starts today with me cleaning house." Without hesitation, he turned to Jameson. "You're fired," Nathaniel said plainly. Effective immediately. Jameson's mouth opened to argue, but no words came out. There was no defense to be made. The employees, though shocked, showed no signs of sadness at the announcement. Some even exchanged quiet glances of relief. Empowering the right people once Jameson had been escorted from the building, Nathaniel turned his attention back to the staff. "Real leadership doesn't hide behind office doors," he said. "It stands beside you when things go wrong, and from today forward, that's the only kind of leadership we'll have here." He then called Nicolette to the front. "You stood out to me," Nathaniel said. "You questioned policies that didn't feel right. You treated guests with respect, even when you weren't given the same respect by management. That's the kind of leadership this hotel needs." In front of the entire staff, Nathaniel promoted Nicolette to assistant manager, bypassing the traditional processes because, as he explained, she had already been doing the job without the title. Her eyes widened in surprise, but there was pride in her smile, along with the confidence of someone who knew she had earned it. A new beginning with accountability. Nathaniel didn't end the meeting with just one announcement. He promised the staff that this was only the start of major changes, including an end to the discriminatory no locals policy, more staffing to ensure employees weren't constantly overworked, a new system for handling maintenance requests with accountability tied to management, not frontline staff. Regular staff meetings where employees could raise concerns without fear of punishment. This hotel is only as good as the people working in it, Nathaniel said, and if leadership doesn't respect those people, we fail together. A cultural reset. By the time the meeting ended, Nathaniel had done more than just fire a bad manager. He had set the tone for a complete cultural reset, one that made it clear that respect, fairness, and accountability were no longer optional. Employees who had once felt invisible now felt heard. Those who had once feared management now saw a leader who was willing to stand beside them, not above them. And most importantly, Nathaniel wasn't just issuing directives from a corporate office. He was there, in the building, proving with his actions that leadership starts on the front lines. It wasn't just about fixing a broken hotel. It was about rebuilding trust, dignity, and pride, one conversation, one decision, and one employee at a time. Nathaniel Whitmore confronts the truth and demands accountability. After spending a full day working undercover at his own hotel, Nathaniel Whitmore, the Black CEO, had all the evidence he needed. He had witnessed the broken processes, the overwhelmed staff, and the culture of fear that thrived under absent leadership. But it wasn't enough for him to quietly issue directives from afar. He believed in confronting the problem head-on, with the people who lived it every day. The next morning, Nathaniel arrived at the hotel in a sharp suit, a stark contrast to the casual clothes he had worn the day before. His presence turned heads the moment he stepped into the lobby. Employees whispered to each other, wondering why someone so obviously important was there. But a few, including Nicolette, recognized him instantly. The quiet new hire was now standing tall as the owner himself. Without waiting, Nathaniel gathered the staff into the lobby for an impromptu all-hands meeting. The tension was thick, especially when Jameson, the general manager, appeared from his office, confusion spreading across his face. Nathaniel began speaking with a calm authority, the kind that needed no raised voice to command attention. "Many of you saw me here yesterday," he said. "You knew me as a new employee. What you didn't know was that I'm also the owner of this hotel and the CEO of the company that purchased it." Gasps rippled through the group. Even employees who hadn't interacted with Nathaniel the day before shifted uneasily. "I came here undercover," Nathaniel continued, "because I wanted to see how this hotel really operates, not the polished version written in reports, but the truth as you experience it every day." He scanned the room, pausing to meet the eyes of several employees who had confided in him or who had been forced to bear the brunt of poor policies and indifferent management. "I saw hard-working employees trying to keep this hotel afloat," Nathaniel said. "But I also saw those same employees blamed for problems they didn't create, abandoned by leadership that should have supported them, and forced to enforce policies that have no place in a modern business." His attention turned directly to Jameson, whose confidence had evaporated the moment Nathaniel identified himself. "The culture here isn't broken because of the staff," Nathaniel said, his voice still calm, but now with an unmistakable edge. "It's broken because of leadership, and that starts at the top." The room was silent as Nathaniel delivered the news. "Effective immediately, Jameson, you are terminated." There was no argument, no second chances. The toxic culture had taken root under Jameson's watch, and there was no room for that in Nathaniel's company. Jameson's stunned expression was met with silent approval from the staff. It was clear that while they hadn't dared to say it aloud, many of them had been waiting for this moment. Turning towards solutions, with Jameson gone, Nathaniel shifted gears. "Firing one person doesn't fix a broken culture," he said. "Change takes all of us." He turned to Nicolette, who had quietly questioned the discriminatory policies and treated guests with respect, even when management didn't. "Nicolette," Nathaniel said, "your professionalism and your willingness to question what's wrong didn't go unnoticed." In front of the entire staff, Nathaniel promoted her to assistant manager, explaining that her commitment to fairness and good service made her the kind of leader the hotel needed. Her eyes widened in shock, but she stood tall, her quiet resolve now recognized and rewarded. A new commitment to staff and guests, Nathaniel didn't just promise surface-level changes. He laid out concrete steps to rebuild the hotel's culture from the ground up. The no locals policy was abolished immediately, replaced with a fair and inclusive guest policy. Staffing levels would be increased, ensuring no employee would be left to handle unreasonable workloads alone. A transparent maintenance process would be created, with clear accountability for ensuring guest requests were properly addressed. Regular staff meetings would become the norm, giving employees a direct voice to leadership. "This is your hotel too," Nathaniel told the staff, "and no one understands the problems here better than you. My job isn't to give you orders, it's to listen and give you the tools to do your jobs well." A cultural reset by the end of the meeting. Nathaniel had done more than fire a bad manager. He had set the tone for what leadership meant under his ownership, accountability at the top, respect for employees at every level, and a commitment to treating every guest with fairness and dignity. Employees left the meeting with a mix of relief, surprise, and cautious optimism. For many, this was the first time they'd felt seen and heard by anyone in leadership. Nathaniel didn't just expose the flaws, he showed them that change was coming, and that change would be led by someone who believed in them. This was no longer just about fixing a failing hotel. This was about building a workplace where everyone from the front desk to housekeeping could be proud to work. And for the first time in a long time, there was hope in the air at Nathaniel Whitmore's hotel. Nathaniel Whitmore's commitment to rebuilding from the ground up, the firing of Jameson, the ineffective and biased general manager, was only the first step in a much larger process. Nathaniel Whitmore, the Black CEO, who had gone undercover to experience the reality of his own hotel, knew that replacing one person wouldn't be enough to fix the deeply rooted cultural problems plaguing the property. As Nathaniel addressed the assembled staff after Jameson's departure, he made one thing clear: real change doesn't happen from the top. Down it happens when leadership listens to the people doing the work every day. He started with the most urgent fixes. First, Nathaniel announced the no locals policy is officially abolished. There were sighs of relief, particularly from Nicolette, who had long questioned the discriminatory practice but had been too afraid to speak up. Every guest will be treated with the same respect, whether they live 5 miles away or 5,000. But that was only the beginning. Nathaniel knew that the frontline employees, housekeeping, maintenance, and front desk staff were the heart of the operation, and they had been treated as expendable for far too long. Investing in the workforce, Nathaniel gathered feedback directly from the employees, asking what they needed to do their jobs well. Lucinda, the exhausted front desk clerk, spoke openly for the first time. "We're always short-staffed," she said. "We're juggling guests, phones, complaints. Sometimes it's just me and Nicolette handling everything. It's too much." Nathaniel nodded. "That's going to change," he promised. He committed to hiring additional front desk agents, ensuring that no employee would be left to manage an overwhelming shift alone again. Creating real support for maintenance and housekeeping, Nathaniel also sat down with Theodore, the experienced maintenance worker who had been ignored and overburdened for months. "We put in requests all the time," Theodore explained, "but nobody follows up. If the guest complains enough, they blame us, but half the time we never even get the parts we need. Nathaniel saw the pattern problems were being buried until they exploded into guest complaints, and then the blame was dumped on the staff. To break this cycle, Nathaniel introduced a new maintenance tracking system where every request was logged, followed up on, and tied to manager accountability. If a work order was ignored, the responsibility would fall on leadership, not the workers. Raising wages and improving training. Another major issue was wages. Nathaniel knew that underpaying staff was not only unfair, it was bad business. High turnover wasn't just a staffing problem, it was a service problem, with constant retraining leading to inconsistent guest experiences. Nathaniel announced a wage increase across all hourly positions, along with structured training programs for new hires. This isn't just about filling shifts, Nathaniel said. It's about investing in people so they want to stay. Recognizing leadership from within, promoting Nicolette to assistant manager wasn't just a gesture, it was a signal to the entire staff that integrity, respect, and professionalism would be rewarded. Nicolette spoke up even when it was uncomfortable. Nathaniel said, "That's the kind of leadership we need, not the kind that hides behind a door." Rebuilding trust. Nathaniel knew the hotel couldn't be fixed overnight. Years of neglect, poor management, and broken policies had left employees cynical and distrustful of leadership. To rebuild that trust, Nathaniel promised to stay involved, not just for a week or two, but for the long haul. Monthly staff meetings with open feedback sessions, a new anonymous feedback channel, so employees could safely report concerns. Regular check-ins, where managers would be required to spend time working alongside their teams, understanding the challenges firsthand. A good hotel doesn't succeed because of policies or branding, Nathaniel told the team. It succeeds because of the people working inside it. That message resonated. For the first time, the staff didn't feel like disposable cogs in a machine. They felt like partners in something being rebuilt, not just from the top, but from the ground up. A new future begins. The transformation wasn't about firing one bad manager or changing a few policies. It was about changing the very culture of the hotel. And with Nathaniel Whitmore leading by example, the staff began to believe that this time, change might actually stick. Nathaniel Whitmore's long-term commitment to lasting change, with the toxic culture exposed and the old management removed. Nathaniel Whitmore, the Black CEO, knew that true transformation couldn't happen overnight. Removing a bad general manager and promoting Nicolette was only the beginning. What mattered now was proving to the employees that change wasn't temporary and that leadership would no longer be invisible. Nathaniel understood that trust, once broken, is not easily restored. The employees at his newly acquired hotel had spent years under leadership that saw them as disposable. They had endured blame for problems they didn't create, policies they had no say in, and workloads that were impossible to manage. For years, they had been told to smile for guests while carrying the weight of a broken system. Nathaniel was determined to show them that those days were over. Visible leadership and daily involvement, rather than disappearing into corporate meetings or retreating to a distant office, Nathaniel made himself present at the hotel daily. He joined morning team huddles, not as a figurehead, but as someone actively listening to concerns. He shadowed housekeeping, maintenance, and front desk shifts, ensuring that every department understood that their work mattered. He made it clear that managers would now be evaluated not just on revenue and occupancy, but on employee feedback and team morale. A hotel doesn't run on policies, it runs on people, Nathaniel reminded the team. If you're not heard, we can't succeed. Accountability at every level one of the first systems Nathaniel implemented was a transparent accountability process. All maintenance requests were logged and tracked publicly, with a clear chain of responsibility. Managers were required to check in with employees daily to identify problems before they escalated. Performance reviews for managers now included anonymous employee feedback, ensuring that leadership couldn't hide behind closed doors. This wasn't about creating a culture of blame, but rather a culture where problems were solved collaboratively instead of being buried until they exploded. Investing in people, not just process. Nathaniel also introduced employee development programs, understanding that turnover wasn't just about wages, it was about feeling valued. Entry-level employees were given pathways to promotion, with clear training and mentorship opportunities. Wages were increased to reflect the value employees brought to the business, and workloads were adjusted so no one was pushed past their limits. Quarterly listening sessions allowed employees to suggest improvements directly to Nathaniel and the leadership team. This investment in people sent a clear message: you are not replaceable, you are essential. Nicolette and Theodore become leaders in change. Nathaniel knew that real cultural change couldn't come from him alone. Employees needed to see familiar faces leading the shift. That's why Nicolette, who had shown courage in questioning bad policies, and Theodore, whose institutional knowledge had long been ignored, were both given leadership roles in shaping new policies. Their input ensured that the new processes weren't just corporate theory, they reflected the reality of what employees faced every day. A new era begins. For the first time in years, employees felt hope. They saw leadership walking the floors alongside them. They knew their concerns wouldn't be punished but valued. They no longer had to cover for neglectful managers or apologize for problems they couldn't fix. Nathaniel Whitmore's message was simple: this hotel will succeed because of you. And if we respect you, support you, and listen to you, we'll not only fix this place, we'll make it somewhere you're proud to work. It wasn't just a speech, it was a promise. And for the first time, the team believed it. The power of listening, learning, and leading by example. As we reflect on the lessons life has taught us, one truth becomes clear: leadership is not about authority, it's about responsibility. Whether you've led a family, a team, or simply lived a life where others turn to you for guidance, you understand that real leadership comes from listening, learning, and leading by example. Too often, we see people in positions of power who have forgotten this simple truth. They issue orders from behind closed doors, unaware of what's truly happening around them. They rely on assumptions rather than taking the time to understand the people they depend on. But the best leaders, whether in business, family, or community, are the ones who are willing to stand beside those they lead, not above them. They understand that you can't fix what you don't see, and you can't understand what you refuse to experience. The value of every voice. If life has taught us anything, it's that every voice matters, especially the quiet ones. The most valuable insights often come from the people who work the hardest, say the least, and are too often overlooked. The caretaker who notices small details others miss. The employee who understands the work better than the manager. The family member who holds the household together without fanfare or credit. Ignoring these voices creates fractures in families, workplaces, and communities. But when we take the time to listen, to really listen, we discover the solutions, wisdom, and strength that were there all along. Respect builds stronger communities. Respect isn't just about politeness, it's about recognizing the worth of every individual. Whether it's a neighbor, a co-worker, or a stranger at the store, the way we treat others creates the environment we live in. When we respect others, we build trust. When we value others' work, we build loyalty. When we listen instead of dismissing, we build understanding. The legacy we leave isn't measured by titles or possessions. It's measured by the kindness we show, the respect we give, and the example we set. Your wisdom matters even if the world moves fast. Your wisdom is timeless. If you believe that experience, fairness, and respect should guide every generation, let's continue this conversation. Like this video if you believe leadership comes from example, not titles. Comment with a life lesson you wish more people understood. Subscribe for more meaningful stories and discussions. Share this video to pass along the power of wisdom. Your story matters, and it's never too late to share it.